guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Brianna, and in today's video I will be showing you guys everything I do to take notes as a student at Princeton University for my classes at college. Especially as someone like new to college, you're probably not going to know exactly what is the best way to do it. Let's get to it. I am going to start off with how I normally take notes on my iPad because that is what I use most of the time. So grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's get to note-taking 101. This is my iPad. It is the 10th generation, I'm pretty sure, and I have a whole like what's on my iPad videos. I love to use GoodNotes, and I just have the app for GoodNotes right here. And I have all of my folders. I have them pretty much organized. Okay, so now we're inside of the iPad. So starting off in freshman year, basically what I like to do is have a folder for every year in college. And you can obviously do this same type of thing and just adjust it for high school as well. So I have a folder for all of my classes. So these were all the classes I took my freshman year. My note-taking strategies do kind of differ depending on the class. Like if it's a lecture-heavy class, then it's going to be different from like a writing seminar, such as for my RI 127 class. So let's go into RI 127 first. And for this class, I basically just had a bunch of readings to do, and that's what I took notes on. And we weren't required to take notes, but at the same time, we had to eventually do a paper on these readings. So I would use the GoodNotes highlighter function a lot of the times, which is right here. And so you can just kind of highlight whatever you want and make it different sizes as well. So that's what I did for a bunch of important notes that I wanted to keep track of. And then I would also just use the margins and the pen to just kind of do a bunch of little annotations like that. So that I felt was really helpful for me because I was able to just go back to whatever page it was and see whatever notes I had. If we go back to home, you can just press new and then you can either import, and then that's how you can import your PDF, which I thought is really nice. So all of these are not notebooks, they're literally just PDFs of all the different pages and stuff that I worked on. And if you're wondering, like, do I use an iPad to take notes or is it better to use a physical notebook? For me at least, they're pretty much the same because unlike typing, you're actually writing it down, and I feel like you can retain the information better that way. So I recommend using an iPad because you can keep literally thousands of pages all in one app. I also had several freshman seminars during my freshman year, and one of them I actually did take notes on a physical notebook because they didn't really allow iPads in the class, but I would take notes the same way as I take notes for my freshman 124 class. So let's go into that class. It was a film class, so I basically had to take notes on the film. And my handwriting isn't the best, I know, but basically I would take notes every single week that we had the class because the class was like a 3-hour class. And since this one was about film and it was kind of similar to my writing sem in that I had to analyze different works, I basically just put the title of whatever it was that we were focusing on, and then I would take notes on it and continue doing that for every single piece that we had. So it was just the title here and then the notes here, and I would do that for every single week that I had the class. And of course, if there was something interesting, I would use a different color, usually red. But within these notes, I would try to ask questions that I wanted to bring to the discussion since this was like a discussion class. And I would also just take note of like the important or interesting points from the films that I would watch. And so as you can see, inside of the folder, I had a notebook in this case. Throughout the rest of my freshman year, I took several science classes because if you didn't know, I am majoring in ecology and evolutionary biology on the pre-med track. So I took molecular biology and neuroscience, psych, and chemistry that year. For molecular biology and for a lot of my like trickier science classes, I have several different notebooks. And it really depends on the class, but the notebooks that always stay consistent over the years and over my classes are lectures and textbook usually, and then sometimes problem sets. So if we go into lectures, for this class in particular, I actually have like hundreds of lecture slides, but in the beginning, I wasn't exactly sure since this was my freshman fall semester, but in the beginning I did start off by taking notes just as if it were a notebook, and I would draw out little diagrams as you can see here. Sometimes it's hard to keep track with the lectures as they're going through, especially if your lecturer is like really fast and speaks super fast. But I would make sure to write down all the lecture goals at the end to make sure I know like what the lecture was about at a glance, and just so I can have these notes to look back. And they're basically super condensed versions of the slideshows. I basically started to just download the slides, the lecture slides, from Canvas, which is like the site that the course uses, and then I would annotate the slides so that I wasn't like wasting time basically just writing down what was already on the slides, if that makes sense. And this is up to your discretion, and I think this works better for some people than others. And I know some people who just like download the slides for every single class like this. I don't know about you, but I feel like when final season comes, it's kind of daunting to have to review almost 1,000 slides. Like, this is actually insane. I'll show you guys in a second on my laptop, but I ended up condensing all of this into a study guide as well, which is really nice. And then quickly, if we go to textbook, I also have the textbook notebook for a lot of my classes, and this is where I literally just title it like chapter whatever, and then I use the headings for the textbook to organize my notes, and I basically just take notes on whatever I see fit after. However, this is incredibly tedious, I almost feel like, because especially if you're getting like 50 plus pages of textbook readings to do per week for every single class, it really adds up. So as you can see, I actually stopped doing this, and honestly just read the chapter for familiarity before you go into the lecture, because at least for this class, that's what they recommended. They didn't even recommend to take notes on it. Be careful and be mindful of you not wasting your time, especially even if you have gotten into a habit of taking notes on this. Is it really going to help me for the final or the midterm? Okay, and then this is the lab notebook that I had for this class. Basically, we had like a structure that we had to follow, so purpose, goal, methods, results, summary, and I basically followed that for every single lab that we had. For the final exam, I would just type up all my notes on my laptop and keep it there. But for this class, for some reason, I decided to just write everything down. And this is basically all just taken from my master notes, like, you know, the slideshow. And I would just go through the study guide that they posted and answer every single question, as you can see here, with my own answers. As you write it down in multiple places, it just instills it in your head even more, if that makes sense. It was very similar for my neuroscience class and also my chemistry class. For neuroscience, for example, if we go to lectures, I labeled it by lecture, and of course I had title of every slide that she was presenting, and then I would just list whatever was on the slide underneath. And this one had so many slides, and she talked so fast, which is why my handwriting is kind of rough here. There's also these like margin notes, and basically what I would do is go back through the lecture recordings and then add anything that I missed, because it was such a fast lecture. So that is what I like to do for this one. And of course I use this line here to separate every single lecture, because it is important you're keeping track of what lecture you're on. And then I do basically the same exact thing for the textbook reading as I did for my mole class. And then for my psych classes, it's really just the same thing, as you can see again and again. Just more lectures and notes, and then using different colors to make things stand out. And then for chemistry, Chem 215, really simple, as you can see, even though this was an advanced class. I just had my notes for chemistry, and I really like highlighting things in different colors to make it stand out. Also, boxing things is a great practice, especially if it's like important equations that you have to memorize. Although for chemistry, I did kind of combine the lecture readings into one notebook with the lectures themselves. As you can see, like the 6B, that was just like the chapter number. And I find that this is helpful if you are someone who wants to just review everything all in one place. Okay, so that was freshman year. And I'll go quickly through sophomore year as well, because I guess there are a couple of differences that I want to go over. These 4 up here are actually my newest classes I'll be taking this semester, but I took the bottom 5 last semester. So I had another chemistry class, and as you can see, there's several more notebooks for this class. And a lot of this was actually from the summer though, which is why I just wanted to keep it here in case. But you don't even have to like keep everything in one place. You can have, for example, this sheet of functional groups in a different notebook if you want to separate it more. We also got cheat sheets, and I put that in another notebook. And then the lectures, they all pretty much look the same as usual, just the lecture number and then highlights and whatnot. But what I would do specifically for the lecture notes is I would obviously take notes during lecture, and then also I would go back over the notes that are posted from the professor and see if I missed anything. And basically just getting that repetition of material really helps with studying. And of course I had the textbook too, and I would screenshot anything that is important to include. Same thing for my other biology classes or math classes. I would just take notes. I don't want to keep showing you guys like the same exact thing, but just trust me that everything here is pretty much going to be the exact same thing. So that is everything that I do for my iPad taking notes. But honestly, for me, I've never really like felt the desire to make it super pretty. You might agree with me or not. I'm just someone who, you know, I've had my system of taking notes for quite some time now, and it basically just transitioned from the physical notebook to my iPad. Now, before I get to my laptop, which I have several like bigger study guides on my laptop, usually when I'm studying for finals or midterms, I kind of convert everything from my iPad to my laptop. But before I get to that, I want to quickly go over how I take notes as a student who has a bunch of lab courses as well, because I'm sure some of you have chemistry or biology labs coming up and you're probably wondering like, how do I take notes for a lab course? So here's your guide for that. This is my lab notebook that I have for chemistry, and I think it's just the typical lab notebook, honestly. Like, you can get this off of your textbook store or even Amazon, I think. They also give you a periodic table, which is kind of nice, as well as a bunch of like chemical information on the back cover. But that is just what one page looks like. As you can see, it's just a blank gridded piece of paper for you to put all of your notes from your experiments on. I have a table of contents that I put all of my labs on, so every single week we have a different lab or a continuation of a lab from last week. That's what a typical page looks like for me. What I like to do is list all of my reagents. This is for chemistry, by the way. So reagents, equipment that I'm using, and then I do procedure and observations. And I write the procedure beforehand. I don't know if all college classes are like this, but I write the procedure, and then once I get to lab and I have my notebook out with me and I'm doing the experiment, I like to use a different color, red in this case, to make any observations or, you know, add anything to the procedure that I missed. Sometimes I would even draw graphs on here. It really just depends on the experiment, but I try to keep this as neat as possible, especially since like this is a carbon copy notebook. So sometimes, like for my organic chemistry classes especially, I would have to hand in my labs. But yeah, that's basically everything from this notebook. I also have like a little post-it note, I don't know if you can see, right here, and I keep it there to separate my Orgo Chem 2 class from my other previous classes. But I will admit that I also use my laptop a lot. Okay, so here we are at my laptop. Like I already said, I take most of my actual like lecture notes on my iPad. I am starting to take some notes for my new art class on here for my readings. I basically just put my notes on this side, anything that I find interesting from the reading, and then I put the picture that it's focused on, the painting or the art piece, on the right side, so I can just, you know, pay attention to it that way and have a picture of it to reference later. Also just title it with the week and the name of whatever the piece of writing is. I mainly use my laptop for my study guide. One is for a stats class, one's for a psych class, and another's for a sociology class. So for my stats class, this was like my master final study guide document. This is really great to have because I could just put it on a Google Doc and it's in my Google Drive. So whenever I want to, I can access it on my phone and, you know, just review it whenever I'm on the go. Just use bullet points under bolded headings, if that makes any sense. And you're gonna see it even more in full for this one, for my psychology class. I would name it with like the lecture or the chapter, and then under it I would have all the different headings for like the slides that he went over. But it's also really nice to take your notes this way because you're able to like condense what you've already learned from your notes into a study guide, and it's again just like going back over through the material, which is really helpful. And I basically just used a combination of bullet points, underlining, and bolding. And then finally, I'll show you guys the one for sociology. Some classes you're gonna have will probably be more structured. Such as this one for sociology. Basically, it has like key terms and key people already in there, and then they also have like review questions. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't see that. Yeah, for this one, I would add my own vocabulary that I thought was important. And then I would also answer all of the questions in a different color. And in this case, it was red, as you can see. And that's just so it doesn't get too crowded. But yeah, again, I would do this in bullet points, and I sometimes added little pictures as well if I needed to. And it would just be, again, titled by the heading of the topic. But yeah, guys, that is basically everything that I use to take notes. So again, at the moment, I don't really take notes anymore in a physical notebook, but hopefully these tips were pretty helpful for you guys, and let me know if you want me to answer any other questions that you may have about note-taking in college. But if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!